On the buck stops here, we turn our focus now to the spate of writers who are returning their literary honours. At last count, that number is placed at 21 and those numbers could still rise. The triggers have been the attacks on rationalists, the assassination of M. Kalburgi and of course the lynching of Muhammad Akhlaq in Dadri. Many of these writers have been demanding that the Prime Minister speak, saying that his silence is what is emboldening the lunatics and is emboldening people to actually turn violent. We've seen that happening in Mumbai today. But there is now a counter-narrative emerging. Several commentators making the argument that the writers are not necessarily taking an ideological or a principled position, that their position is stemming essentially from a hatred for Narendra Modi. Let's take that to our special panel today. Joining us from Dehradun is Nayantara Sahgal, well-known author and among the first to actually trigger this national debate. She's on the program along with Swapan Dasgupta, who's written a very interesting column called, and let me just read this out, The Flawed Logic of the Award Returnees. And he's among those making the argument that this is actually personal and not so much about the recent incidents. And we're also joined from Baroda today by Ganesh Devy. He's a literary critic and activist and writer, a multilinguist really, who's done a lot of work to save many of India's dying languages. And he is among the latest writers to have returned his literary honor. Nayantara Sahgal, I'd like to start with you, if I may. There is a lot of attention being put and a lot of debate around your decision to return the Sahitya Akademi award. First, the questions were, why didn't you do it after the 1984 riots? Why didn't you do it after other cataclysmic events? Now, the critique seems to have become, Nayantara Sahgal basically dislikes Narendra Modi, and this is what your decision is all about. Your comments.
Barkha, may I have your permission to make a brief statement first?
Yes, sure.
Of
go
mine,
ahead.
and then I will answer your question.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
All right, I've written it down so that I don't waste your time. The attack on Mr. Kulkarni this morning is one more sign that the fundamentalists are out of control. They can threaten, injure or kill anyone who doesn't agree with them. And in the light of this situation, I find it very bizarre that some speakers on the media call it a law and order situation. Others shout about what they call selective outrage. And this kind of coverage, which aims to give a balanced picture, only succeeds in trivializing the tragedies that are taking place. There seems to be no awareness of the blood in the streets or the stench of fear around us, because defenseless Indians who do not conform don't know who will be targeted next. And there seems to be no understanding that the writers who have returned their awards or resigned their positions in the Academy are fighting for the right to dissent, not only for themselves, but for the right of every Indian to live, eat and worship as he pleases, which has nothing to do with liking or disliking of Mr. Modi.
Yes. What I'm hearing you say is that that for the media to seek another side to this is actually to force a balance that is not required, because there is only one dimension to what we are seeing, and the latest of course being what happened with Sudhindra Kulkarni this morning, which by the way all of us have condemned outright and called a black day for democracy. So are you suggesting that there is really only one position, ma'am, to take on this entire issue, and it does go all the way up to the Prime Minister because he's not spoken out enough?
Look, you are bringing the Prime Minister into this. I am not. I'm talking about a much larger situation where no Indian who does not conform no longer feels safe in this country. That's a much bigger question than who is Prime Minister and who is not.
But the last time we were talking, you did express specific disappointment with the silence of Prime Minister Modi And you did say, and I remember saying that while Indira Gandhi was a Democrat gone wrong, this government is fascist. And you did think that that is what had created this environment that you're talking about.
Precisely. You're quite right about that. And it is classic fascist technique to promote one line of thought, to forbid people to think as they think, and to order them to think what they are told to think. And that is what is happening today. No dissent is tolerated. People are being killed, injured, intimidated. What would you call it? Is that not fascist?
Let me bring in Swapan now. Swapan, your column actually begins with saying you've known Nayantara Sahgal for 37 years. She's somebody you respect and admire a great deal. This is not a vitriol-filled conversation, but you heard what she said. And to that extent, she does locate this government for her within a larger fascist ideology. She points to what we saw happening in Mumbai today as one in a series of incidents, and I have to say it does come across like that to the average Indian. Like, people these days say, what the hell is going on in our country?
I think everybody agrees that there have been certain very unpleasant and disagreeable things which have happened in this country. 3 incidents, and I think Mrs.
I can't hear Swapan very well.
Yeah, I'll speak a bit louder. There have been 3 very, very disagreeable incidents which have happened, and Mrs. Sahgal pointed out all of them. The murder of the rationalist in Dharwar, the lynching in Dadri, and today Mr. Kulkarni's face being blackened. All of them are very disagreeable. And I think everybody is within their rights to protest against these. Yes. And I think to even suggest for a minute that Mrs. Sahgal should not protest against this would be absolutely a travesty. She has a complete and utter right as a citizen of this country in a democracy, not only her, but any other person, whether they are a writer or whether they are anything else, any citizen, has a right to protest. People have different forms of protests. And I think in India what we've seen is a large number of protests on one issue after the other. And at no point has the right to protest ever been fundamentally questioned by any institutional arrangement, any institutional shifts, unlike what happened in the emergency. I'm not bringing in the emergency. Mrs. Sahgal was one of the most robust fighters against the emergency.
But let me read out what you write. Let me read out what you write. You say Nayantara Sahgal and the others hate Narendra Modi and in likelihood hated him ever since the day he entered public life. And then you go on to say the reason may well be aesthetic. You quote somebody else who calls him uncultured and so on. But the argument you're making is, and let me fast forward, so intense is the hatred of Modi, Sahgal called him a fascist, that the government's alleged sins of omission have been merged into a disavowal of the Union of India.
Yeah.
What about what Nayantara Sahgal has said makes it a disavowal
I'll
of the
tell
Indian
you,
Union?
because it's the form of protest. It's not the protest per se, but that you do not want to have any connection whatsoever with anything to do with the Indian state. This is, remember, the Sahitya Akademi award is not a government award. It's an award by the state, given, and we may have all our criticisms of how the Sahitya Akademi functions, etc., but it is an award by the state. Now, the only time you can actually return an award of the state is when you think that the state itself has become illegitimate in this country.
And that is your disagreement
to my mind,
with
that
her.
is the thing. Because you protest. And you know, the space for protest, Gopal Gandhi today made a very passionate plea. He said the space, protest, dissent, and more people should give it. Now, to my mind, there is enough space to protest, there's enough space for dissent, there's enough space to outrage. That has never been taken away from this country, not by 3 incidents. And that remains. And to say that India has suddenly turned fascist because the person who's heading it is somehow, in some people's view, a fascist, to my mind, suggests a certain degree of disrespect for both the office and it goes against
But
whatever
one can't,
empirical.
but one
You
can't
of course-
question the
of course
silence, the silence
of course you
or
can-
the relative silence. There
you
has
can
been
call-
some
of course,
referencing now,
you
but
can
Dadri
call-
was never
of course,
named,
of course.
Kalburgi was
No,
never
no, no,
named.
You can question everything. You can criticize Modi, the Prime Minister.
Okay.
But to say that India has suddenly turned into a fascist state is, to my mind, an over-reading and an unnecessary extrapolation which is not borne out by facts.
I will get Nayantara Sahgal in, and then I'll come to you, Ganesh Devy. Nayantara Sahgal, I'm hoping you could hear Swapan. You know, he's saying nobody takes away.
Not very clearly.
Let me summarize it for you. Let me summarize
What is
it
your
for you.
question, Barkha?
The question is, he says that nobody takes away your right to protest. That right is sacred in a democracy. But when you return a Sahitya Akademi award, which is an award given by the state and not by any particular government, it is a kind of disavowal of the Indian Union, of the Indian state. And why do you need to do that? What has changed in India that you're suddenly calling it a fascist country? That that one man becoming Prime Minister has not indicated any institutional shift, according to Swapan.
Yeah, according to Swapan, everybody has a right to protest. But those who have protested have been shot by gun-toting motorcyclists. What does Swapan have to say about that?
Do you want to come in there?
You know, anybody who gets killed.
Well, if he doesn't want to answer,
No,
I
no,
can go
he is
on. I
answering.
can go on with the.
He's answering. He's
I
answering.
said anybody who gets killed for
I
whatever
can
reasons,
go
whether
on
for their
with the rest of
beliefs,
my-
whether for their faith, whether for their inclinations, I think it's reprehensible.
Okay,
I mean, that is understood.
Ma'am, go ahead.
I can't hear what Swapan is saying. Barkha, will you tell me?
He's saying, he is saying that he believes that if anyone is attacked for their beliefs or their faith or any personal choice, that is reprehensible. So he is not condoning the violence that Kalburgi's assassination reflects or the smearing of Kulkarni's face reflects and so on. But he is questioning your generalizing India as having turned fascist after the 2014
Yes.
election.
Now, I don't believe he's given a satisfactory answer to the question of why these three writers have been shot. But let me go on to the next point. The Sahitya Akademi was set up by Jawaharlal Nehru as a guardian of literature, and the other academies as guardians of art, music and culture. They are supposed to be autonomous bodies. We writers expected them to say something in condemnation of the murder of three writers. They did not he did not say a word, the president of the Academy. In protest against that, we have returned our awards or resigned from our positions on the Academy. Now, Swapan has very high-flown speeches about legitimacy of state and all the rest of it. Let's just say that the Academy has not performed its function.
Okay.
Okay, I wouldn't
that is
disagree
why
with
we are
that. So this is
protesting.
a club dispute.
Yeah.
So is this what it is? Is it a club dispute?
Let me
I
begin-
mean, that's what it is.
let me begin
That there
Ganesh
is one
Devy.
institution which is flawed in this country, which is not, about which there has been a lot of criticism, not least by a parliamentary committee headed of all people by Sitaram Yechuri, who talked
So
about
you're
it.
saying you can't make criticism of the Sahitya Academy?
You can make a criticism of it.
in
You
the
must
same,
make.
this equivalent to
Yeah,
a
exactly.
criticism
You
of the
know,
larger
make
political
any
environment.
criticism you want against the Sahitya Academy, particularly its president, who is seen to be quite a supine character.
Okay, let me get in
Why are
Ganesh
you
Devy.
extending it?
Let me get in Ganesh Devy. Ganesh Devy, is this about a battle against your decision, a battle against the Sahitya Academy, or is it a larger political position against what you believe is rising intolerance under the Modi government? I think those are, that is where maybe the fault line of this debate is.
Barkhaji, let me first, I am sitting in Baroda, let me salute Nayantara ji for her courage. And for Mr. Swapan Dasgupta, my humble plea would be that we writers have written letters of turning down these awards as writers, and we were not writing legal affidavits. So one should not get into an autistic way of looking at the words we have written. We have expressed an outrage, sense of outrage. Let me go back historically to the emergency situation when a Marathi writer, Durga Bhagwat, stood on a platform next to Yashwantrao Chavan, where he was invited as president, and questioned the legitimacy of the state. And that's what actually challenged the emergency. 3 lakh people gathered in Maharashtra to listen to what she was saying. She was not writing a legal affidavit. It's a writer's statement, a writerly statement. It has to be seen in that light. One more thing.
Yeah.
About 100 years back, in Pune, Lokmanya Tilak was booked by the British government, colonial government, for trespassing the law, for expressing some ideas, and he was sent to jail. But in the same city, a man was killed for expressing views 100 years later. In Kolhapur, Shahu Maharaj 100 years ago, when he wanted to protest against the Hindu hierarchy and domination, he invited a low-caste person to become Shankaracharya and set up the Shrungeri Mutt there.
Yeah.
In that same, this is 100 years ago, a progressive man. But 100 years later, when Pansare was defending the cause of the low-caste people, he was shot dead. Now finally, in Dharwad, I mean, I come to Sahitya Akademi now very precisely. Pansare, yes. Now in Dharwad,
but sir, the question,
there was a man called V.K. Gokak.
No, sorry, I know. Can I just interject just to ask you something? I think the question is this disillusionment with the academy, or is this disillusionment with the government under Narendra Modi? To you first, Ganesh, and then to Nayantara.
It is disillusionment with the academy. Yeah, it is disillusionment with academy, which is not able to stand up. I mean, I was mentioning V.K. Gokak, who was president of the Sahitya Akademi at one time. When the British went to arrest the students, he was principal of a college, he stood in the entrance and blocked the way, said, first arrest me, then arrest the students. This is, we don't have presidents and vice presidents of that caliber, because even if they are great writers, I admire both of them, Chandrasekhar Kambar and Professor Tiwari, they seem to be intimidated by what is happening next door to other institutions. In the same Ravindra Bhavan, named after Rabindranath Tagore, who talked about mind without fear.
Say that would be a very different debate. That would be a very different debate. It would not have really got this media attention if it had only been a debate. If it had only been a debate about the Sahitya Akademi and whether it is truly autonomous, maybe it would not have become this high profile, this volatile. I want to take this. One minute, sir. 1 minute. I want to just bring in Nayantara Sahgal and then come back to Swapan. Sir, 1 minute. I'll come back to you. Give me half a second. Ma'am, I want to quote from you something that Swapan writes, and you can respond to it. He actually brings up the example of Dom Moraes tearing up his Indian passport before a television camera, calling it a puerile bravado. And I think the argument that he's making is that while outrage is valid, why distance yourself from the Indian state? Why lose belief in India? Why sever connections with the Indian Union? Why believe that anything institutionally has changed since Narendra Modi was elected? How do you see that argument?
Well, I haven't understood how Dom Moraes comes into this, but Chopin probably knows best about that. No, but let's leave Dom Moraes out of it.
Yeah.
As I said in the original statement that I read out, I very precisely said that Indian writers had handed in their awards and all that in protest against the Academy's refusal to protest against the murder of writers. But there is no question that has become a much larger question of the state. Why does the state leave people unprotected in this fashion? And why does its ideology go uncondemned when it behaves like that?
One of the things you said to me last week was, will the real Mr. Modi please stand up? What did you mean?
Because he says one thing when he's abroad and he says zero when he's in India. He has taken a Maun Vrat. He doesn't utter in his own country about the tragedies that are happening under his eyes.
Let me bring in Swapan now. I think Nayantara doesn't see the connection, and she doesn't see her disinvesting in India or in the future of India.
Look, let's take a passage from Ms. Shashi Deshpande, who resigned from a post in the academy. I'm not sure whether she gave away a prize. She writes...
She resigned from a post.
Yeah. She writes in her letter, it has also become clear that writers who are supposed to be the conscience keepers of society are no longer considered intellectual leaders. Their voices no longer matter. Now, what she's saying is that there has been a shift in the hierarchy of importance, which has been attached to people who were earlier seen to be thought leaders in this country.
Are you really saying that this is all about writers feeling that they're not given importance by this government?
I think what we are seeing,
I mean, wouldn't that be a very reductionist narrative?
It may be. What
it's
we
coming
are
against
seeing
the
is
backdrop
that
of very, very real incidents of violence and injustice.
What we are seeing is that a set of very disparate set of compulsions have caused this. First, we have people who believe, as Mrs. Sahgal does, that India has more or less become fascist because of her lead. There are others like
Ganesh
Devy, who feel that the fault really lies with the academy.
Yeah.
There are people like Gopal Gandhi, who's not really connected with it, who says more people should return it. Why? Because there has been the shrinking of space for protest and dissent.
Yeah, which is what Nayantara Sahgal is also
she's
saying.
also saying that.
Yes.
To my mind, what has really shrunk is this, what I talked about.
The importance,
the relative importance which a certain particular set of people had in this country. Maybe they should have that importance. I don't know. But at present, what we are seeing is a churning in India, which has resulted in people who are not perhaps so well tutored in the arts and letters to now who have a more technocratic vision of society come to the fore. Now, you may have a completely justified critique of that, but there has been a shift in the hierarchical.
But there are two different things here. Are you saying this government may not instinctively be as attuned with the arts and the letters, or are you saying this government just has its own favorites and previous?
No,
what are you saying?
I'm basically saying that the priorities of this government are completely different from the priorities which some of the people here have been talking about. And that, therefore, it is not, the 21 who have written, and the people who more or less are talking about many more should resign, and some are resigning in solidarity with those who are resigning. They are the people who from day one have been saying, oh dear, this is a terrible change that has come over India. And that is really, and if it hadn't been Dadri, if it hadn't been something else, it would have been another
How
problem.
do you know that material,
no, I don't
material can't
that
be made up?
No, I'm not. I'm saying
which Indian would want these to be the headlines out of our country?
I am saying that it is my belief that if it hadn't been Dadri, if it hadn't been Kulkarni's, Kulkarni of course has triggered a resignation spate, if it hadn't been the unfortunate murder of the rationalists in Dharwar, I think you can always find in India enough reasons to get upset.
Let me give the last word to Nayantara Sahgal.
Barkha?
Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
Barkha?
Go ahead.
It is awfully hard to get the gist of the long speech that Swapan has made, but I caught one bit of it where he said that this government has its own priorities. And that, of course, every government has its own priorities. He's quite right. But one of those priorities, so far as I've been able to gather, is to make what they call smart cities. Now, what is the use of a smart city if it's got stupid people living in it who believe that Ganesh's nose was grafted on by Vedic surgery?
I think I proved my point.
But
I think I think precisely, this is precisely what I've been saying, that we are talking about people who live in two different worlds. There are people who are looking down and think that all the people who are ruling this country today are stupid. They are not, they haven't a sense of what is culture. They are not familiar with books. They are not familiar with the entire tradition, literary tradition.
So you're saying it's literary snobbery, but the issues are of violence and injustice.
The word snobbery is not one I use,
Okay.
but you have used it, and I don't think inappropriate.
I'm asking you if you're suggesting it. It's not my word at all. It's not what I think.
I don't think in this context it would be an inappropriate usage.
Okay, I have to end, but Ms. Sahgal, I'm giving you very quickly the last word. The suggestion that the spate of resignations or returning of honours is in part guided by a certain set of writers, the artistic elite, people of letters, not getting any importance or space in the new establishment. That in many ways Modi represents the new establishment, the new elite of India, and that is what this conflict is really about. That's Swapan's argument. Your last thoughts and then I have to end.
Barkha.
Yes.
All right. Let me tell you, Barkha, that writers are not in search of importance. They are in search of publishers. And they are in search of the freedom to write.
Yes.
And that is my last word.
We'll leave it there. Swapan Dasgupta, Nayantara Sahgal, Ganesh Devy, thank you so much for joining us on the Buck Stops.